She was just a medic, they said. Just a field medic who patched up wounded soldiers and kept the medical supplies organized. Until the day she grabbed the controls of a damaged C-130 cargo plane and flew it through the worst storm anyone had ever seen, saving 37 lives in the process. That was 5 years ago, and Captain Marcus Thompson still couldn't accept that Staff Sergeant Elena Morales was really gone. The morning mist clung to Forward Operating Base Meridian like a shroud, turning the Afghanistan landscape into something ethereal and haunting. Marcus walked the same route he'd taken every morning for the past 5 years, his boots echoing against the concrete as he passed the medical wing. The sound always reminded him of Elena's quick footsteps as she hurried between patients, her medical bag bouncing against her hip with each urgent stride. Her name was still there on the memorial wall, carved into the black marble alongside 23 other fallen heroes. Staff Sergeant Elena Morales, Kia 2019, lost during humanitarian evacuation mission over the Hindu Kush mountain range. No remains recovered, just scattered debris from cargo flight 447, found across 3 miles of mountainous terrain after the worst storm in recorded history had torn the aircraft apart. Marcus paused before her nameplate, his coffee steaming in the cold morning air. 5 years. 5 years since Elena had disappeared into that impossible storm, and yet the medical wing still operated under protocols she had established. Her emergency triage procedures were still printed and laminated on every wall. Her voice still echoed in the minds of every medic who rotated through the base, teaching them that sometimes saving lives meant taking risks that others would call reckless. The medical facility bore her fingerprints in ways that went beyond official documentation. The supply closets were organized according to her system, where the most critical items were positioned exactly where a medic's hands would naturally reach during a crisis. The trauma bay still used her modified equipment arrangements that had reduced emergency response times by 40%. Even the way the stretchers were positioned followed her careful calculations about optimal patient flow during mass casualty events. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the current head medic, approached with his morning report clutched against his chest. His young face carried the weight of responsibility that Elena had once shouldered with seemingly effortless grace. "Sir, about Medical Bay 3, the equipment staging area that's been sealed since before my rotation began. The new medics are asking questions about why we can't use that space for additional storage." Marcus felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. Medical Bay 3 had been Elena's workspace, her sanctuary where she had performed medical miracles that defied standard training protocols. The bay remained exactly as she had left it on that final morning, with surgical instruments arranged in her distinctive patterns and medical supplies organized according to her revolutionary inventory system that had saved countless minutes during critical emergencies. "That bay stays sealed, Rodriguez," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an edge that made the younger medic step back slightly. Elena Morales developed those procedures through years of field experience. That workspace represents knowledge that can't be replicated through textbook training alone. Rodriguez nodded quickly, but Marcus could see the confusion flickering in his eyes. How could he explain that keeping Elena's medical bay preserved was about more than respect for fallen comrades? That some part of him, despite 5 years of official reports and crashed aircraft debris, still believed she might walk through those medical facility doors someday, ready to resume saving lives with the same determined intensity that had made her legendary among field medics. The base intercom crackled to life, announcing the morning medical briefing. Marcus drained his coffee and headed toward the medical conference room, where 12 medics waited for their daily assignments. The room still bore traces of Elena's influence, from the wall charts she had created showing advanced trauma procedures to the medical reference books she had annotated with field notes that had become unofficial training materials. Inside the conference room, conversation died as Marcus entered. These medics respected him, but he knew they also wondered about his dedication to preserving every detail of a dead medic's legacy. Corpsman Third Class Jennifer Walsh, fresh from medical school, had once asked why they couldn't update Elena's procedures with newer techniques from military medical journals. Marcus had looked at the young medic with eyes that had seen too much battlefield medicine. Because Staff Sergeant Morales didn't learn those procedures from journals. Walsh, she developed them by saving lives under fire in conditions that medical textbooks never describe. Those techniques represent knowledge that can't be taught in classrooms. The briefing proceeded with routine assignments, but Marcus found his mind drifting to Elena's final transmission from cargo flight 447. Her voice that day had sounded different over the radio. Not panicked or desperate, but purposeful, like she knew exactly what she was doing despite flying into weather conditions that had grounded every other aircraft on the base. The humanitarian mission had been routine by military standards. 37 injured civilians from a remote village needed immediate medical evacuation to the trauma center at Bagram Airfield. The cargo plane had been loaded with patients, medical equipment, and a skeleton crew, including Elena as the primary medic responsible for keeping the injured stable during flight. Then the storm had moved in with impossible speed, turning clear skies into a maelstrom of wind, lightning, and hail that radar operators described as unlike anything in meteorological records. Every aircraft had been grounded immediately, except for Cargo Flight 447, which was already airborne and carrying patients who would die without immediate surgical intervention. The flight crew had been experienced professionals, but when lightning strikes disabled the aircraft's primary navigation systems over the Hindu Kush mountains, it was Elena who had somehow taken control. Radio communications captured her voice guiding the aircraft through conditions that should have been fatal, speaking with a calm authority that defied her lack of pilot training. Base Control, this is Lifeline aboard Cargo 447, primary pilot. Incapacitated, co-pilot unconscious, but I've got the stick. Maintaining course for Bagram despite instrument failure. Patients are stable, but we're running out of time. The transmission had sent shock waves through the command center. Elena Morales was a medic, not a pilot. She had no official flight training beyond basic aircraft familiarization required for medical evacuation missions. Yet somehow, she was flying a damaged C-130 through the worst storm in regional history, keeping 37 critically injured patients alive while navigating mountain terrain that veteran pilots avoided under perfect weather conditions. Marcus remembered standing in the control tower, watching radar signatures that made no sense. Elena's aircraft was maintaining a flight path that seemed to anticipate wind patterns before they developed, avoiding turbulence zones that weather radar showed forming seconds later. It was as if she could read the storm itself, finding corridors of calm air that existed for mere moments before disappearing. How is she doing that? Air Traffic Controller Sergeant Kim Martinez had whispered, her voice barely audible over the static-filled radio communications. She's flying through wind shear that would tear apart aircraft twice that size. The final transmission came at 15:23 hours local time. Elena's voice cutting through radio interference with crystal clarity. Base Control, Lifeline. We're on final approach to Bagram. All patients stable and ready for immediate triage. Tell the trauma team to prep for 37 urgent cases. And Marcus, if something happens to me, make sure they remember that some promises are worth keeping, no matter the cost. Then silence. Radar showed Cargo Flight 447 disappearing from screens. Just 3 miles from Bagram Airfield. Search and rescue teams found scattered debris across the mountainside, but no survivors. No bodies, just fragments of aircraft and medical equipment that told the story of an impossible flight that had somehow delivered 37 patients to safety before the storm claimed the aircraft and everyone aboard. The patients had arrived at Bagram Trauma Center exactly as Elena had promised. carried by rescue teams who found them conscious and stable despite surviving an aircraft crash. In hurricane-force winds, every one of them lived. Every one of them went home to families who had expected to receive death notifications instead of miracle recoveries. Marcus walked through the medical facility's memorial corridor, where photographs showed Elena at work in various field hospitals and medical stations throughout her deployment. In every image, she wore the same focused expression of someone who understood that other people's lives depended on her expertise and dedication. Her hands always appeared steady, whether suturing battlefield wounds or organizing medical supplies for maximum efficiency during emergency response. The newer medics who rotated through the base would ask about the woman in the photographs, drawn to stories about Elena's innovations in field medicine. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would tell them about her advanced triage protocols that had reduced patient mortality rates by 60%. Corporal Walsh would describe Elena's modified medical equipment, configurations that allowed single medics to perform procedures that normally required full surgical teams. But it was Master Chief Petty Officer Thomas Chun, the base's senior medical officer who had served alongside Elena for 2 years, who told the stories that made young medics understand why her legacy remained so powerful. His weathered face would grow distant as he described watching Elena work during mass casualty events, moving between patients with a level of medical intuition that seemed almost supernatural. She could look at a wounded soldier and immediately know exactly what needed to be done. Chen would explain to wide-eyed medical students, not just the obvious injuries, but underlying complications that wouldn't show up on diagnostics for hours. I watched her save lives by treating conditions that hadn't manifested symptoms yet. Those stories had created a mythology around Elena Morales that transcended normal military folklore. New medical personnel would arrive expecting to find standard field hospital operations, only to discover that everything from equipment placement to emergency procedures bore the influence of a medic who had revolutionized battlefield medicine through innovations that medical textbooks were still trying to understand. The medical supply warehouse remained organized according to Elena's system, where critical items were positioned based on statistical analysis of emergency frequency rather than alphabetical or categorical arrangements. Her medical protocols were laminated and posted throughout the facility, serving as reference materials that had been adopted by field hospitals across 3 different combat zones. Marcus found himself standing outside Medical Bay 3, staring through the reinforced window at equipment that hadn't been disturbed for 5 years. Elena's surgical instruments lay arranged in patterns that reflected her understanding of emergency medicine efficiency. Her medical bags hung on wall hooks exactly where she had placed them before that final mission. Even her handwritten notes remained pinned to bulletin boards, containing medical insights that had influenced an entire generation of field medics. The bay looked frozen in time, preserved as a shrine to medical excellence that younger personnel found both inspiring and unsettling. Sometimes Marcus would catch medics standing outside the sealed door, studying Elena's equipment arrangements like students trying to understand the methods of a master physician whose techniques had saved hundreds of lives. Evening approached. Across Forward Operating Base Meridian, casting long shadows through the medical facility's corridors, Marcus completed his daily walk through Elena's preserved workspace, noting that every instrument and supply item remained exactly where she had left them. The medical bay held an almost sacred quality, representing dedication to saving lives. That had ultimately cost Elena her own life while keeping 37 others alive. As darkness settled over the base, Marcus whispered the same words he had spoken every evening for 5 years, standing before Elena's memorial plaque, still keeping watch. Lifeline, still believing some promises transcend death itself. Thunder rumbled in the distance, reminding him of that impossible storm that had taken Elena away while she piloted an aircraft through conditions that should have killed everyone aboard. But 37 families had loved ones who came home because Elena Morales understood that being just a medic sometimes meant becoming something far more extraordinary than anyone thought possible. The alarm clock beside Marcus's bunk displayed 430 hours when his eyes opened, just as they had every morning for the past 5 years. No snooze button, no gradual awakening. His internal clock had synchronized itself to Elena's old schedule, the pre-dawn routine she had maintained to ensure the medical facility was fully prepared before the day's first casualties arrived. Marcus dressed in the darkness, his movements automatic and precise. The ritual had become sacred to him, though he'd never admitted that to anyone. First, the walk to Medical Bay 3 to check that the security seal remained intact. Then a stop at the supply warehouse to verify that Elena's organizational system remained undisturbed. Finally, coffee in the medical facility break room while reviewing patient reports that still followed her documentation protocols. The break room held Elena's presence like a photograph holds light. Her coffee mug remained on the shelf exactly where she had left it, unwashed and untouched despite regulations requiring all personal items to be cleared from common areas. The mug bore the faded logo of a civilian medical school she had attended before enlisting, a reminder that her medical expertise had been forged through both academic study and battlefield experience. Marcus poured his coffee into a standard issue ceramic cup, unable to bring himself to use Elena's mug, but unwilling to allow anyone else to remove it. The contradiction didn't escape him. Every morning, he made the same decision to preserve her space while denying himself the comfort of using her belongings. It was as if touching her personal items might somehow diminish the possibility of her return. The medical facility's morning shift change brought familiar faces carrying questions that Marcus had learned to anticipate. Corpsman Second Class Maria. Santos approached with a requisition form and the diplomatic expression of someone preparing to challenge established procedures. Captain Thompson, about the medical equipment in Bay 3. We've got new trauma cases coming in from the northern sector, and we could really use that surgical table for overflow patients. The sealed bay has equipment that could save lives if we could just access it temporarily. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever anyone suggested altering Elena's preserved workspace. The surgical table Santos referenced wasn't just medical equipment. It was the table where Elena had performed her most innovative procedures, modified according to her specifications for maximum efficiency during critical operations. The equipment in Bay 3 represents advanced medical configurations that took years to perfect. Marcus replied, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who had explained this decision countless times. Moving or reconfiguring those instruments would compromise procedures that have saved hundreds of lives. Santos nodded respectfully, but Marcus caught the exchange of glances between younger medical staff members. He knew what they were thinking, though none would voice it directly. 5 years was a long time to maintain a memorial workspace when living patients needed medical resources. Their pragmatic concerns made sense from every perspective except the one that mattered most to Marcus. The truth was more complicated than resource allocation or memorial preservation. Elena's medical bay contained innovations that defied standard training protocols, equipment arrangements that seemed to anticipate medical emergencies before they developed. Her instruments were positioned with surgical precision that reflected understanding of trauma medicine beyond what any textbook could teach. Marcus had witnessed Elena work in that bay during mass casualty events, moving between surgical procedures with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. She could perform emergency surgery while simultaneously diagnosing patients who hadn't yet shown symptoms of internal injuries. Her hands seemed to know exactly which instrument to reach for before conscious analysis determined what procedure was needed. The medical facility's central computer system still operated under Elena's patient management protocols, tracking everything from medication inventory to surgical scheduling with algorithms she had developed during late-night shifts. When the facility was quiet, her digital fingerprints existed throughout every database, making it impossible to update systems without dismantling innovations that had revolutionized battlefield medicine. Chief Medical Officer Colonel Patricia Williams arrived for the weekly facility inspection, carrying the expression of someone who had made difficult decisions during sleepless nights. Williams had been Elena's commanding officer and had personally signed the orders authorizing the preservation of Medical Bay 3 immediately after the cargo plane crash. But 5 years of administrative pressure had clearly taken their toll. "Marcus, we need to discuss the practical implications of maintaining Bay 3 as a memorial space," Williams said, settling into her office chair with visible fatigue. "I've got base commanders asking questions about resource allocation, and I'm running out of administrative justifications for keeping functional medical equipment in storage." Marcus remained standing, instinctively adopting the defensive posture he'd learned to assume whenever Elena's legacy faced bureaucratic challenges. Williams had been a mentor to both of them, which made these conversations particularly difficult. She understood the emotional significance of preserving Elena's workspace, but she also bore responsibility for operational efficiency across the entire medical facility. "Colonel, Elena's procedures are still being implemented by field hospitals throughout the region. Her innovations have become standard protocol for trauma medicine in 3 different combat zones. Dismantling her workspace would be like destroying a laboratory where life-saving discoveries were made." Williams leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with the analytical gaze of someone who had seen too many good officers consumed by grief that wouldn't heal. "Marcus, Elena Morales was an extraordinary medic who saved countless lives through her innovations and dedication. But she's been gone for 5 years. At some point, honoring her memory has to coexist with practical medical operations." The conversation continued for 40 minutes, touching on budget constraints, personnel efficiency, and administrative regulations that required constant justification for non-standard resource allocation. Williams presented logical arguments supported by documentation from base commanders who questioned the wisdom of maintaining memorial spaces that could serve operational needs. Marcus countered with statistical analysis showing that Elena's preserved procedures had reduced patient mortality rates across multiple medical facilities. He cited training programs that used her documented techniques as teaching materials. He referenced medical journals that had published papers based on her innovations in battlefield trauma response. But beneath the professional discussion lay a more fundamental question that neither officer wanted to address directly. When did grief transform from healthy memorial into unhealthy obsession? When did preserving someone's legacy interfere with moving forward? When did honoring the dead begin to compromise service to the living? The afternoon brought routine medical operations that followed Elena's established protocols without acknowledging her influence. New medical personnel performed procedures using her techniques while remaining unaware that their training materials had been developed by a medic who had died 5 years earlier. Her innovations had become so thoroughly integrated into standard practice that her individual contributions had disappeared into institutional knowledge. Marcus walked through the medical facility during shift change, observing operations that bore Elena's influence in ways that went beyond obvious memorial preservation. The patient triage system used her assessment criteria. The surgical preparation protocols followed her timing sequences. Even the way medical supplies were distributed reflected her understanding of emergency logistics. The newest rotation of medical personnel had never heard Elena's name mentioned in training, yet they performed procedures she had developed and used equipment arranged according to her specifications. Her medical legacy had transcended individual recognition, becoming part of the facility's operational DNA in ways that would persist long after her memorial plaque was forgotten. Evening medical rounds revealed the continuing influence of Elena's documentation methods. Patient charts followed her detailed recording protocols that captured not just immediate symptoms, but environmental factors and stress indicators that could predict complications hours before they manifested. Her approach to medical record keeping had become so standard that new medics assumed these comprehensive procedures were universal military practice. Master Chief Chun found Marcus in the medical facility's break room during the evening quiet period, carrying 2 cups of coffee and the weary expression of someone who had spent the day managing bureaucratic requirements while trying to maintain medical excellence. Chun had been Elena's closest collaborator during her time at the base, and his perspective on her legacy carried weight that transcended official regulations. "The new medical officers from command headquarters are asking about Bay 3 again," Chun said, settling into the chair across from Marcus. "They want to conduct a formal review of memorial space allocation versus operational needs. They're using diplomatic language, but they're essentially questioning whether we're letting sentiment interfere with military efficiency." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, recognizing that Chun understood the complexity of their situation better than anyone else. Chun had witnessed Elena's medical innovations firsthand and understood that her preserved workspace represented more than memorial sentiment. It contained configurations and procedures that couldn't be replicated through standard training. "What did you tell them?" Marcus asked. "I told them that Elena Morales developed medical procedures that are still saving lives 5 years after her death. That her workspace contains equipment arrangements that took years to perfect and represent knowledge that can't be found in any medical textbook. That dismantling her bay would be like destroying a research laboratory where breakthrough discoveries were made." Chun paused, staring into his coffee with the expression of someone wrestling with difficult truths. "But I also understand their position, Marcus. We're maintaining a memorial that consumes resources while new medics need training space and equipment access. At some point, we have to decide whether preserving the past serves the present." The conversation stretched through the evening, touching on memories of Elena's work, concerns about administrative pressure, and questions about the appropriate balance between honoring fallen comrades and serving current operational needs. Both men had served with Elena long enough to understand that her innovations represented more than individual achievement. They reflected a level of medical intuition that seemed almost supernatural. Marcus shared stories about Elena's ability to diagnose conditions before symptoms appeared, her uncanny timing during medical emergencies, and her equipment modifications that had improved patient outcomes in ways that medical textbooks couldn't explain. Chun contributed observations about Elena's work methods that had consistently produced results that defied standard medical expectations. As the evening wound down, Marcus walked his familiar route through the medical facility, checking security seals on Bay 3 and verifying that Elena's organizational systems remained intact. The base had grown quiet, with only essential personnel maintaining overnight operations. The medical facility's corridors held an almost sacred quality during these late hours, as if Elena's presence lingered in the spaces where she had performed her most important work. Standing before Elena's memorial plaque in the dim lighting, Marcus felt the weight of 5 years spent preserving her legacy against mounting pressure to move forward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges to the preservation of her workspace, new questions about resource allocation, and new arguments for updating procedures that had remained frozen in time since her disappearance. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of the medical facility, Marcus could almost feel Elena's presence in the organized efficiency of the supply warehouse, the precise arrangement of surgical instruments, and the detailed patient protocols that continued to save lives 5 years after she had flown into that impossible storm. Some legacies, he believed, were too important to abandon simply because the world demanded that grief follow convenient schedules. The memorial wall reflected the emergency lighting with a soft glow that made Elena's engraved name appear almost luminescent in the darkness. Marcus touched the granite surface gently, whispering the same promise he had made every night for 5 years. Still keeping watch. Elena, still believing that some missions never truly end. The storm came without warning, rolling across Forward Operating Base Meridian, like a wall of gray steel that swallowed the horizon in minutes. At exactly 0515 hours local time, the massive medical facility emergency doors began to cycle open with mechanical precision, their hydraulic systems responding to automated protocols that shouldn't have been activated during severe weather conditions. Marcus stood with the assembled medical staff in the main triage area, conducting the standard pre-shift briefing before the morning's first patient transport arrivals. The routine was familiar: equipment status reports, patient load assessments, and supply inventory updates. Nothing that should have made his pulse quicken or caused the strange electrical sensation that suddenly filled the air around them. Then she walked through the storm. A lone figure emerged from the gray curtain of rain and wind, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She wore standard medical fatigues that somehow remained dry despite the downpour, and her distinctive auburn hair was pulled back in the same efficient ponytail that Marcus remembered from 1,000 emergency responses. Staff. Sergeant Rodriguez dropped his medical clipboard with a metallic clatter that echoed through the stunned silence of the triage area. Holy ... Staff Sergeant Morales, isn't it? Marcus felt the world tilt sideways beneath his feet. The woman, walking toward them through weather that had grounded all aircraft and forced base-wide shelter. Protocols had been officially dead for 5 years. He had attended her memorial service, watched them present the folded flag to her sister, and carried her memory through countless sleepless nights spent wondering if he could have done something to prevent her final mission. Elena Morales stopped, 15 feet away from the assembled medical staff, her dark eyes sweeping the facility with the same analytical intensity Marcus remembered from emergency situations. She noted the updated equipment configurations, the newer personnel who had replaced transferred colleagues, and the subtle changes in facility layout that had occurred during her absence. But she didn't explain herself or announce her presence. She simply stood there, a living contradiction to official casualty reports and classified incident files, studying the medical facility like a physician assessing a patient's condition. Before determining the appropriate treatment protocol, Chief Medical Officer Williams stepped forward, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, recognition, and barely controlled confusion. "Where the hell have you been for 5 years?" she demanded, her voice carrying the edge of someone whose administrative world had just been shattered by an impossibility. Elena's response came in a voice that was lower and more controlled than anyone remembered, carrying an authority that seemed to emanate from experiences that couldn't be documented in any official record. "Classified medical operations. And I wasn't dead." The triage area erupted into controlled chaos as medical personnel struggled to process what they were witnessing. Some reached for communication devices to report the impossible arrival. Others moved toward Elena with standard reintegration protocols, only to hesitate as they encountered something in her presence that felt fundamentally different from the medic they remembered. Base security arrived within minutes, following emergency protocols for unidentified personnel accessing restricted medical areas. Elena calmly produced identification documents that appeared current and valid, despite bearing dates that should have been impossible for someone who had been declared killed in action 5 years earlier. Colonel Patricia Williams demanded immediate explanations and emergency debriefings. Elena handed over a sealed medical pouch marked with security classifications that none of the assembled personnel recognized. The documentation bore official stamps and authorization codes that appeared legitimate but referenced medical programs that didn't exist in any standard military database. But Marcus couldn't stop staring at Elena's hands. They bore the same calluses from endless hours handling medical instruments and surgical equipment. The same unconscious way she adjusted her medical utility belt and checked equipment placement with muscle memory that couldn't be faked. Details that an imposter couldn't replicate. Memories that made his chest tighten with impossible hope mixed with profound confusion. "Prove it," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the urgent radio chatter and confused conversations. Surrounding them, "Prove you're really Elena Morales." Elena walked deliberately toward Medical Bay 3, the secured workspace that had remained untouched and unopened for 5 years. Without hesitation, she entered the 8-digit security code from memory and pressed her palm against the biometric scanner that should have rejected her handprint as belonging to deceased personnel. The bay door opened with a soft, pneumatic whisper. Inside, perfectly preserved, lay her medical workspace exactly as she had left it before that final cargo flight. Elena moved through the space with the reverence of someone returning to a sacred place, her hands trailing across surgical instruments that had been arranged according to her specific procedures for maximum emergency efficiency. She retrieved a small metal case from behind a supply cabinet, opening it to reveal a collection of medical notes written in her distinctive handwriting. The papers contained detailed observations about patient treatment, innovations, and surgical technique modifications that had never been documented in official medical records. Elena carefully selected one page and handed it to Marcus. The note described the experimental trauma procedure she had developed for treating multiple gunshot wounds during mass casualty events. It was dated 3 days before her disappearance and contained medical insights that had later become standard protocol at field hospitals throughout the region. "I wrote this after treating the convoy attack survivors from Checkpoint 7, Elena said clearly, her voice carrying memories that only she and Marcus shared. "You stayed up all night helping me modify the surgical instrument arrangements for faster response times. We tested the new configuration on training mannequins until we could complete the procedure in under 4 minutes. Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. The medical note contained details that no imposter could have known, observations about patient care that had never been recorded in official documentation. Elena wasn't just alive. She was exactly the medic he remembered, carrying the same dedication to saving lives that had made her legendary among medical personnel. "Corpsman." Santos approached cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, we've been using your protocols, all of us. Your triage procedures, your equipment arrangements, your patient documentation methods. They've saved hundreds of lives." Elena looked at the young medic with an expression that might have been gratitude or might have been something more complex. "I know. I've been monitoring medical reports from facilities using those procedures. The implementation has exceeded projected efficiency improvements by 37%. "But ma'am," Santos pressed, "where were you really? How have you been monitoring medical reports from facilities across multiple combat zones?" Elena's answer came with the calm certainty of someone who had spent 5 years working in medical environments that didn't exist on any official base roster, places that don't appear on standard military medical facility maps, operations that require medical personnel to work beyond conventional protocols. The afternoon brought emergency, administrative meetings, and suspended normal medical operations while Base Command struggled to process Elena's impossible return. Official channels buzzed with encrypted communications between Forward Operating Base Meridian and headquarters, personnel who seemed more concerned with managing information flow than understanding how a declared casualty had returned to active duty. Marcus watched Elena move through medical facility routines like she had never left. Her medical fatigue still fit perfectly despite 5 years of supposed absence. Her equipment locker combination remained embedded in muscle memory. But her eyes told a different story than the medical record suggested. They held experiences from medical operations that no standard deployment could provide. knowledge of trauma procedures that went beyond anything taught in military medical training, and an understanding of emergency medicine that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. This was Elena Morales, but she had been transformed by medical experiences that no official report would ever document. As evening approached, Marcus found himself standing outside Elena's quarters, the same room that had remained officially vacant for 5 years while being maintained according to regulations for personnel missing in action rather than killed in action. Through the window, he could see her sitting at the small desk, methodically writing in a worn medical journal. Elena looked up as if sensing his presence, and for a moment their eyes met through the glass. In that instant, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Elena Morales hadn't just survived 5 years of classified medical operations. She had been working in medical facilities that existed beyond normal military structure, treating patients and developing procedures in environments that the rest of the medical community didn't even know existed. The implications staggered him. Elena's return wasn't just about personal survival or military bureaucracy. She had been serving in medical roles that operated outside conventional understanding, developing life-saving procedures while officially listed as a casualty. Her medical expertise had been enhanced by experiences that defied standard training. Protocols.base communications crackled with urgent, encrypted transmissions throughout the evening as headquarters. Personnel struggled to process reports about Elena's return. Marcus caught fragments of conversations that suggested her presence had triggered administrative protocols that existed above his security clearance level. Medical staff who had worked with Elena before her disappearance began sharing memories. That took on new significance in light of her impossible return. Master Chief Chun described surgical procedures where Elena had demonstrated medical intuition that bordered on supernatural, anticipating patient complications before diagnostic equipment detected underlying problems, Corman Walsh recalled. Emergency situations where Elena had modified standard medical protocols in ways that shouldn't have worked according to textbook medicine, yet consistently produced better patient outcomes than conventional treatments. Her innovations had seemed inspired by understanding of trauma medicine that went beyond what any training program could provide. The stories painted a picture of a medic whose capabilities had exceeded normal human limitations even before her disappearance. Elena had demonstrated medical knowledge that seemed to come from sources beyond standard education, performing procedures with success rates that defied statistical probability. As Marcus processed these recollections, he began to understand that Elena's return represented something more significant than survival against impossible odds. She had been selected for medical operations that required capabilities beyond conventional training, serving in facilities that operated according to different rules than standard military medicine. The evening medical briefing proceeded under Elena's quiet observation as she studied current procedures and equipment configurations with the analytical intensity of someone conducting a comprehensive medical assessment. Her presence transformed routine administrative meetings into consultations with a medical expert whose experience transcended normal military service. Younger medical personnel found themselves seeking Elena's input on procedural questions, drawn to her medical expertise despite official uncertainty about her status. She answered their questions with precision that demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of current medical protocols, while suggesting improvements that reflected 5 years of advanced experience. Elena's return had fundamentally altered the medical facility's operational dynamic. Personnel who had been implementing her preserved procedures while treating them as historical artifacts suddenly found themselves working alongside the medic who had developed those innovations. The distance between memorial preservation and active medical practice had collapsed in ways that challenged everyone's understanding of how military medicine operated. Standing before Elena's memorial plaque in the facility's main corridor, Marcus realized that her engraved name would soon require removal or modification. The memorial wall had been designed to honor fallen personnel, not to accommodate impossible returns from officially declared casualties. But Elena's presence raised questions that went beyond administrative procedures or memorial protocol. Her medical knowledge had clearly expanded during 5 years of classified operations, suggesting that her disappearance had been part of something larger than accident or enemy action. She had been selected for medical service that operated according to different rules than conventional military medicine. As base operations wound down for the evening, Marcus understood that Elena Morales hadn't simply returned from the dead. She had been serving in medical roles that existed beyond normal understanding, developing capabilities that would revolutionize trauma medicine while officially listed as a casualty of war. 3 days after Elena's impossible return, the formal Medical Review Board convened in a secure conference room that Marcus had never seen used for personnel evaluations. Elena sat at the head of a polished table surrounded by medical officers whose credentials belonged to departments that didn't appear in standard military organizational charts. Their uniform insignia indicated specializations in medical fields that Marcus couldn't identify. Colonel Williams served as the board chairman, but her usual authoritative demeanor had been replaced by the careful uncertainty of someone navigating uncharted administrative territory. The other board members included officials whose names weren't listed on any base roster, their security clearances extending to medical programs that operated beyond conventional military medicine. Staff Sergeant Morales, Colonel Williams began, her voice tight with professional skepticism. Are you mentally and physically prepared to resume medical operations after 5 years of unexplained absence? Elena said nothing initially. Instead, she reached into her medical utility pouch and produced a worn leather medical journal, placing it on the conference table with deliberate precision. The journal looked ancient, its pages yellowed from constant use and edges worn smooth by countless hours of documentation under field conditions. What is this? Williams asked, her voice carrying suspicion mixed with curiosity. 5 years of medical records, Elena replied simply, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had documented thousands of life-saving procedures. Patient treatments, surgical innovations, trauma protocols, and medical discoveries that haven't been filed through conventional channels. The review board fell into stunned silence as they examined page after page of impossible medical entries. Every line contained detailed information about patient diagnoses, treatment protocols, surgical procedures, and medical outcomes that had never been reported through official military medical networks. The handwriting was unmistakably Elena's, but the medical procedures described shouldn't have been possible using standard equipment and training. Major Davidson, a trauma surgeon who had been pushing hardest for Elena's psychological evaluation, flipped through the medical journal with growing amazement. Staff Sergeant, where exactly did these medical operations occur? These surgical procedures describe techniques that require equipment we don't have access to in field hospitals. Elena looked through the conference room window toward the distant mountains where her cargo plane had disappeared 5 years earlier. Medical facilities that operate in zones where conventional trauma medicine reaches its limitations. Places where standard protocols prove inadequate for the injuries that need treatment. Marcus felt his skin crawl as he processed the implications of Elena's medical journal. He had worked alongside her for 2 years before her disappearance, and her attention to medical detail had been legendary even then. Every procedure meticulously documented, every patient outcome analyzed for potential improvements. This journal represented thousands of hours of medical practice that had occurred while she was officially listed as deceased. The questioning continued for 6 hours, with board members attempting to verify Elena's identity through increasingly specific medical knowledge tests. She answered detailed questions about surgical procedures with precision that demonstrated comprehensive understanding of advanced trauma medicine. Her responses revealed familiarity with medical innovations that had been developed during her absence, as well as techniques that seemed to anticipate future developments in battlefield medicine. Elena navigated the interrogation with the same surgical precision she had once used to treat multiple casualties during mass emergency situations. But something was fundamentally different about her responses. They were too perfect, too comprehensive. She wasn't just demonstrating preserved medical knowledge. She was revealing capabilities that exceeded anything she had possessed before her disappearance. When questioned about specific patients she had treated before the cargo plane crash, Elena provided detailed medical histories that included post-treatment outcomes she couldn't have known through conventional follow-up protocols. She described the long-term recovery progress of soldiers she had treated years earlier, including complications that had developed months after their initial medical care. Staff Sergeant Morales, Major Davidson pressed, "How do you have access to patient follow-up information from medical cases dating back to your time at this facility?" Medical privacy regulations prevent that level of post-treatment monitoring. Elena's answer came with the measured confidence of someone who had spent 5 years working within medical systems that operated according to different rules than conventional military medicine. Some medical operations require comprehensive patient outcome tracking that extends beyond standard treatment protocols. Effective trauma medicine means understanding long-term treatment effectiveness, not just immediate intervention success. The board members exchanged glances that suggested Elena's responses were creating more questions than they answered. Her medical knowledge was clearly authentic, but it encompassed understanding that went beyond what any standard military medical training could provide. She demonstrated familiarity with surgical techniques that belonged to specialized medical programs that most board members had never encountered. That evening, the Pentagon contacted Forward Operating Base Meridian through encrypted communication channels that bypassed normal administrative networks. The transmission wasn't requesting investigation into Elena's mysterious return, but authorizing her complete medical clearance with full operational privileges. The authorization bore security classifications that exceeded the review board's clearance levels. The memorandum was marked for eyes-only distribution, signed by medical officials whose credentials belonged to programs that operated above conventional military medical authority. Effective immediately, Staff Sergeant Morales cleared for advanced medical operations. Personnel remains under specialized medical review. No external medical inquiries permitted. Marcus found Elena in the medical facility's primary trauma bay. During the evening shift change, conducting what appeared to be a comprehensive assessment of current medical capabilities. She moved through the space with renewed familiarity, noting equipment upgrades and procedural modifications that had occurred during her absence, while simultaneously identifying areas where further improvements could enhance patient treatment outcomes. "Mind if I observe?" Marcus asked, approaching with 2 cups of coffee and the cautious demeanor of someone who wasn't entirely certain he was interacting with the same person he remembered. Elena gestured toward the observation area, accepting the coffee with hands that bore new scars alongside the familiar calluses from medical instrument handling. "Still drinking your coffee black with 2 sugars?" she asked, her voice carrying memories of countless shared shifts when they had worked together during emergency situations. "Still remembering details that matter," Marcus replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Want to tell me what really happened during those 5 years?" Elena looked at him with eyes that held medical knowledge, accumulated through experiences that couldn't be found in any textbook or training program. "You know I can't discuss classified medical operations, Marcus, but I can tell you that some medical situations require capabilities that exceed conventional training." "Then tell me why you came back now, after 5 years of officially being dead," Marcus pressed, studying her face for traces of the medic he had known before her disappearance. "Because there are medical situations developing that require intervention," Elena replied, her voice carrying the quiet intensity he remembered from emergency situations. Conditions that standard military medicine isn't equipped to handle. Marcus studied Elena's expression, searching for the medic who had shared terrible jokes during night shifts, who had covered for his procedural mistakes during complex surgeries, and who had saved his life during a mass casualty event when hostile fire had pinned down their medical evacuation team. The woman sitting across from him carried those memories, but she had been fundamentally altered by medical experiences that had expanded her capabilities in ways that seemed almost supernatural. "What happened to you out there?" he asked softly, lowering his voice as evening medical operations continued around them. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her medical utility pouch where she kept updated patient assessment protocols. "I learned that some medical conditions exist beyond what conventional trauma medicine can treat, Marcus. Injuries and illnesses that require understanding of human physiology that goes deeper than standard medical training provides." The trauma bay had grown quiet around them, with evening medical staff conducting routine equipment maintenance while maintaining respectful distance from a conversation that felt weighted with significance beyond normal shift change discussions. Other medical personnel seemed to sense that Elena's return represented something more complex than survival against impossible odds. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice to ensure their conversation remained private. "The Elena I knew was an exceptional medic, but she didn't possess medical knowledge that exceeded her training. She learned procedures through experience and innovation, not through access to medical programs that apparently don't exist in official records. The Elena you knew died in that cargo plane over the Hindu Kush mountains," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "What returned is what was necessary to complete medical missions that couldn't be abandoned." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach as he processed the implications of Elena's words. "What do you mean?" Elena stood, collecting her untouched coffee and the medical journal that contained 5 years of impossible documentation. "I mean that sometimes the price of saving lives is becoming something other than what you were when the mission started." She walked away, leaving Marcus alone with questions that he knew would challenge everything he understood about military medicine and human capability. But as he watched Elena disappear into the medical facility's corridors, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Her reflection in the polished medical equipment surfaces appeared somehow translucent, as if she existed partially in normal reality and partially in some other dimension that overlapped with conventional existence. The next morning brought Elena's first practical medical evaluation since her return. A convoy attack in the northern sector had produced multiple casualties requiring immediate trauma intervention, providing an opportunity to assess her medical capabilities under actual emergency conditions rather than theoretical questioning. Elena, suited up in medical fatigues that fit exactly as they had 5 years earlier, donning equipment that seemed to adjust to her needs with unusual precision. Marcus observed from the Medical Coordination Center as she prepared for the emergency response with methodical efficiency that exceeded even her previous standards of professional excellence. The casualties arrived by helicopter evacuation, bringing 7 soldiers with injuries ranging from shrapnel wounds to complex trauma requiring immediate surgical intervention. Elena moved between patients with a level of medical assessment accuracy that seemed to transcend normal diagnostic capabilities. She could examine a wounded soldier and immediately understand not just the obvious injuries, but underlying complications that wouldn't manifest symptoms for hours. Her medical intuition appeared to operate at levels that bordered on supernatural, identifying treatment priorities with precision that exceeded what any diagnostic equipment could provide. "Patient 3 has internal bleeding from liver laceration that won't show on initial scans," Elena announced during triage, her voice carrying absolute certainty despite having conducted only visual assessment. "Priority surgical intervention required within 30 minutes to prevent hemorrhagic shock." The medical team rushed patient 3 to emergency surgery, where exploratory procedures confirmed Elena's diagnosis exactly as she had predicted. The liver laceration was precisely where she had indicated, requiring immediate surgical repair. That saved the soldier's life through intervention that had been initiated before symptoms appeared. Similar scenarios played out with each casualty. Elena's medical assessments proved accurate beyond statistical probability, identifying complications that conventional diagnostic procedures missed and recommending treatments that produced better outcomes than standard protocols would have achieved. Her medical knowledge appeared to have expanded during her 5-year absence to levels that defied normal human capability. Master Chief Chen observed the emergency medical response with growing amazement and unease. Elena's medical performance exceeded anything he had witnessed during their previous years of working together. She demonstrated understanding of trauma medicine that seemed to anticipate patient needs before they developed, providing medical care that operated at the intersection of science and something approaching the supernatural. How did she know about the internal bleeding before we had diagnostic confirmation? Shun asked Marcus privately, his voice carrying the bewildered tone of someone whose medical experience couldn't explain what he had witnessed. "I don't know," Marcus replied honestly, watching Elena complete post-surgical documentation with efficiency. That suggested she was processing medical information at speeds that exceeded normal human capability. But every one of her diagnoses has been accurate, and every treatment recommendation has improved patient outcomes beyond what standard protocols would have achieved. The afternoon brought additional medical challenges as Elena integrated into normal facility operations. She reviewed current medical procedures and equipment configurations, suggesting modifications that would improve emergency response effectiveness while demonstrating familiarity with advanced medical techniques that hadn't been part of her original training. Her medical innovations during the emergency response had already been noticed by personnel throughout the facility. Equipment arrangements that she had modified during the morning's emergency had improved treatment efficiency by percentages that would normally require months of careful analysis and testing to achieve. Elena's medical knowledge appeared to encompass understanding of human physiology that went beyond what any conventional medical education could provide. She could predict patient responses to treatments with accuracy that suggested access to medical information that existed beyond normal diagnostic capabilities. As evening approached, Marcus realized that Elena Morales had returned from her 5-year absence with medical capabilities that exceeded anything she had possessed before her disappearance. Her trauma medicine skills had been enhanced by experiences that operated outside conventional understanding, transforming her into something that existed at the intersection of human medical expertise and capabilities that seemed almost supernatural. Verification process had confirmed Elena's identity, while simultaneously revealing that she had been fundamentally altered by medical experiences that no official record would ever document. She remained the same person in terms of memories and core characteristics, but her medical capabilities had transcended normal human limitations in ways that challenged everything Marcus understood about trauma medicine and human potential. 2 weeks after Elena's return, an encrypted transmission arrived at Forward Operating Base Meridian through communication channels that Marcus had never seen activated. The message bypassed standard military networks, arriving directly at Elena's personal communication terminal with priority classifications that exceeded base command authority levels. Elena read the transmission in silence, her expression shifting from focused attention to grim determination. "We need to talk," she said to Marcus after completing her review of the encrypted message. Privately, away from official monitoring systems. They met in the abandoned motor pool maintenance bay at 2,200 hours, a location Elena had selected because its concrete construction and distance from main facilities would prevent electronic surveillance. The space felt cavernous and hollow, filled with shadows that seemed to move independently of their emergency lighting sources. Elena activated a small device that emitted a barely audible electronic hum, creating what she described as a communications dead zone that would prevent their conversation from being monitored or recorded. The technology appeared more advanced than anything Marcus had seen in standard military equipment inventories. "Marcus, what I'm about to tell you exists above your current security clearance, but you need to understand why I really came back," Elena began, her voice carrying the weight of 5 years spent keeping secrets that could reshape military medicine. "My disappearance wasn't an accident. The cargo plane crash was a cover story designed to extract me from conventional military service for assignment to medical operations that don't officially exist." Marcus felt the maintenance bay spin around him as Elena's words challenged everything he had believed about her disappearance. "What kind of medical operations?" Elena produced a tablet computer that displayed information with security classifications Marcus didn't recognize. The screen showed medical facility locations that didn't appear on any official military maps, staff rosters listing medical personnel who were officially designated as killed in action, and patient treatment records for injuries that seemed to exceed normal battlefield trauma. Specialized medical facilities that treat conditions conventional military medicine can't handle, Elena explained, her voice carrying 5 years of experience with medical challenges that existed beyond standard training protocols. Injuries caused by experimental weapons, exposure to classified chemical agents, and trauma resulting from operations in environments that officially don't exist. The tablet displayed patient records showing medical cases that defied normal understanding of human physiology. Soldiers who had survived exposure to energy weapons that left cellular damage requiring regenerative medical procedures. Personnel who had been injured during operations in electromagnetic anomaly zones that had altered their biological functions in ways that required entirely new treatment approaches. These patients can't be treated in standard military hospitals because their conditions would raise questions about operations that must remain classified, Elena continued. They need medical care from personnel who understand that some injuries exist beyond conventional medicine. Marcus studied the medical records with growing amazement and horror. The cases showed soldiers who had been officially declared killed in action, but were actually receiving long-term medical treatment for conditions that no standard medical textbook described. Their injuries required medical procedures that seemed to operate at the intersection of science and something approaching supernatural healing. "How many medical personnel are involved in these operations?" Marcus asked, beginning to understand the scope of what Elena was describing. Elena's expression darkened as she scrolled through staff rosters that listed dozens of medical personnel from bases across multiple combat zones. 43 confirmed. Medical staff who have been extracted from conventional service for assignment to classified medical operations, all officially listed as killed in action to maintain operational security. The names on the roster included medics, surgeons, and medical specialists who Marcus recognized from various military medical facilities. Elena highlighted specific entries showing personnel who had been declared casualties during the past 7 years, their deaths providing cover for reassignment to medical programs that operated beyond normal military oversight. Dr. Sarah Kim, from the trauma center at Landstuhl, was officially killed in a vehicle bombing in Iraq 3 years ago. Elena pointed to one entry. She's actually been treating soldiers who were injured during operations involving experimental aircraft that operate in atmospheric conditions that don't officially exist. Another entry showed Master Sergeant James Walsh, a combat medic who had supposedly died during a helicopter crash in Syria. Walsh has been developing medical procedures for treating personnel who were exposed to energy weapons during classified reconnaissance missions. His work has revolutionized trauma medicine for injuries that conventional hospitals have never encountered. Elena continued scrolling through the roster, revealing medical personnel who had been extracted from conventional service and assigned to Facilities that provided medical care for the most classified military operations, their expertise, had been reserved for treating conditions that would compromise operational security if handled through normal military medical channels. Where are these medical facilities located? Marcus asked, studying geographical coordinates that didn't correspond to any known military installations. Underground medical complexes constructed in remote areas where electromagnetic anomalies provide natural concealment from detection systems, Elena replied. Facilities that can treat patients whose injuries would be impossible to explain using conventional medicine. The tablet displayed schematic drawings of medical facilities that appeared more advanced than anything Marcus had seen in standard military hospitals. Operating theaters equipped with technology that seemed decades ahead of current medical equipment. Diagnostic systems that could analyze biological conditions at the molecular level. And treatment devices that appeared to work through principles that conventional medicine didn't recognize. The medical equipment in these facilities operates using technology that's been developed through analysis of recovered materials from classified incidents, Elena explained. Equipment that can treat injuries caused by weapons and environments that officially don't exist. Marcus realized he was looking at medical infrastructure that had been designed to support military operations that existed beyond public knowledge. Facilities where medical personnel could treat soldiers who had been injured during missions involving technology and environments that the general military community wasn't authorized to know about. What happened to you during those 5 years? Marcus asked, beginning to understand that Elena's medical capabilities had been enhanced through exposure to technology and techniques that exceeded conventional training. Elena showed him medical training records that documented her education in procedures that seemed to operate at the intersection of medicine and something approaching supernatural healing. She had learned to treat injuries using techniques that accelerated natural healing processes, diagnose conditions through methods that seemed to involve reading patients' biological energy patterns, and perform surgeries using instruments that appeared to work through principles that conventional medicine couldn't explain. I learned that human physiology has capabilities that conventional medicine doesn't recognize, Elena said. Healing potential that can be activated through proper understanding of biological energy systems. Medical techniques that work by harmonizing natural healing processes rather than simply treating symptoms. The training records showed Elena working with medical equipment that seemed to diagnose patients through scanning their electromagnetic fields, treatment devices that accelerated cellular regeneration, and surgical instruments that could repair tissue damage at the molecular level. Her medical education had expanded to encompass understanding of human biology that went far beyond what standard medical schools taught. But why are you telling me this now? Marcus asked. What changed that made it necessary to reveal classified medical operations? Elena's expression grew grave as she displayed a new set of medical records showing recent casualties from operations that had gone wrong. 3 weeks ago, a classified mission in the electromagnetic anomaly zone over the Himalayas resulted in severe injuries to personnel who can't be treated using the medical technology we have available. They need immediate evacuation to facilities with more advanced capabilities. The medical records showed soldiers who had been exposed to energy fields that had caused cellular damage beyond anything Elena's facility could treat. Their conditions were deteriorating rapidly, requiring medical intervention using technology that was only available at more advanced classified medical facilities. 12 medical personnel and 18 soldiers are trapped in a facility that was damaged during the mission, Elena continued. They need immediate medical evacuation, but their location is in an electromagnetic dead zone that prevents normal aircraft from operating. The only way to reach them is by flying through atmospheric conditions that would disable conventional navigation systems. Marcus began to understand why Elena had returned to Forward Operating Base Meridian after 5 years of classified medical operations. You need to use cargo aircraft to evacuate personnel from a location that can only be reached by flying through conditions that would be fatal for normal pilots. The electromagnetic anomalies in that region create navigation challenges that require pilot capabilities enhanced through exposure to the same technology that's been used to advance medical procedures, Elena confirmed. Pilots who can navigate by reading atmospheric energy patterns rather than relying on conventional instruments. Elena showed him flight data from the region where the medical personnel were trapped. The atmospheric conditions created electromagnetic interference that would disable normal aircraft navigation systems, while generating turbulence patterns that would tear apart conventional aircraft. Successful rescue operations would require flying capabilities that operated beyond normal human limitations. The cargo plane I was piloting when I officially died was equipped with experimental navigation systems that allowed flight through electromagnetic anomaly zones, Elena explained. I didn't crash during that storm 5 years ago. I was extracted to begin training for missions that would eventually require evacuation of personnel from locations that conventional aircraft can't reach. Marcus processed the revelation that Elena's disappearance had been planned. Extraction for training that would prepare her for rescue missions in environments that exceeded normal flight capabilities. Her medical expertise had been enhanced during 5 years of working with technology that seemed to operate at the intersection of science and supernatural capability. How do you plan to reach the trapped personnel? Marcus asked, understanding that Elena was preparing for a rescue mission that would require both medical expertise and flying capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. Elena displayed flight path calculations that showed routes through the electromagnetic anomaly zone using navigation techniques that seemed to involve reading atmospheric energy patterns. Cargo aircraft modified with the same experimental systems that allowed my original extraction to navigate through those conditions by synchronizing with natural electromagnetic flows rather than fighting against them. The flight plans showed routes that would take advantage of brief windows when electromagnetic anomalies created corridors of stable atmospheric conditions. Successful navigation would require pilot capabilities that could anticipate energy pattern changes before they occurred, flying through spaces that existed between normal atmospheric physics. The medical personnel and soldiers who are trapped have been waiting for evacuation for 3 weeks, Elena said. Their medical conditions are deteriorating beyond what local treatment capabilities can handle. Without immediate rescue, all 30 individuals will die from injuries that conventional medicine can't treat. Marcus realized he was looking at a rescue mission that would require Elena to demonstrate both medical expertise and flying capabilities that had been enhanced through 5 years of exposure to technology that operated beyond conventional understanding. She would need to pilot aircraft through atmospheric conditions that would be fatal for normal pilots while providing medical care for patients whose injuries exceeded standard treatment protocols. When do you leave for the rescue mission? Marcus asked, understanding that Elena's return to Forward Operating Base Meridian had been preparation for an operation that would test capabilities she had developed during 5 years of classified training. Elena showed him mission parameters that indicated departure within 72 hours, using experimental aircraft that had been pre-positioned at the base through logistics channels that operated beyond normal military supply networks. The atmospheric conditions in the target region will only permit rescue operations during a brief window when electromagnetic anomalies create navigable corridors. The mission timeline showed Elena would have less than 6 hours to complete evacuation of 30 personnel from a facility located in terrain that officially didn't exist, using aircraft that operated through principles conventional aviation didn't recognize. Success would require medical and piloting capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. As Elena concluded her briefing, Marcus understood that her return represented preparation for a rescue mission that would demonstrate the full extent of capability she had developed during 5 years of classified operations. She had been transformed into something that existed at the intersection of medical expertise and supernatural ability, prepared to save lives in environments that transcended normal understanding of what was possible.